Okay, part 3 of debugging cast and damage taken with Beast Fur Shawl and Hiron's Fury. Um, so, what are we doing from a cast and damage taken perspective? We have two items we care about. There is the Storm Secret Ring, and we are wearing two of those, which deal 250 damage to us each, lightning damage, whenever Herald of Thunder hits something. And we have Eye of Innocence, which does 100 damage to us whenever we ignite something. Now, Herald of Thunder can hit frequently, but it can only really ignite one thing. So what ends up happening right now is that in red maps, rare mobs survive, and then we have to clean up the rare mobs. And killing the rare mobs like a red beast or something like that is just not fun. It's a lot of standing around and waiting, which really takes you out of the slideshow mentality of playing a cast with damage taken build. I mean, it looks a lot better on my system than on the video, but sometimes the number of frames a second is definitely like a handful. But that's why we're doing it, right? Just trying to push it and trying to solve it. So let's talk about single target, because when we're dealing with single target, we can actually make some assumptions. For starters, we can assume that all the damage we take is from Herald of Thunder. And by doing that assumption, we can now calculate kind of like what is our damage per second from a spell in our setup. So let's start talking through that. First off, this is the table of cast and damage taken. The level, the damage threshold. The level really doesn't matter. It's convenient because we'll need it to figure out what level our stuff needs to be. But the damage threshold matters. The less more damage multiplier matters a lot. And then the maximum level of the support skill gem, of the spell gem that we can support. We're gonna assume 0 CDR cast and damage taken. That means that it's gonna take 264 milliseconds after a cast before it starts counting up damage. It says 250, but 250 isn't a real number. 264 is a real number in Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, every step the game engine takes is 33 milliseconds. That's the way it's built. And 33 milliseconds is a very important number to keep in mind whenever you're dealing with cast any CDR type build, especially when your CDRs are low, right? Because what we can do with a little bit of CDR is we can get it down to 231 milliseconds, right? So like 9 or 10% CDR on a cast with damage taken build is like a 12% increase in damage. Right, so you have some weird non-linear things going on. In this particular case, we're just gonna stick with the default of 8 ticks. A tick is this 33 millisecond entity for cast with damage taken to start tallying up damage. And we're gonna assume 4 ticks for how frequently our Herald of Thunder is going to hit something. And now let's talk about some of the numbers that we're going to use for the math, and then let's look at what the results are, and then we're going to play with the numbers. So first of all, our Herald of Thunder is going to do 500 damage to us. We have 2 Storm Secrets. They have a total of 90% CDR between the two of them, and that gets us hit by 500 damage. By the way, 90% on 2 Storm Secrets is fantastic. More than that is not very useful. Because you have to get to 150 to get to the next breakpoint. Right? So when you're shopping for a Storm Secret and something says 45%, 2 45% Storm Secrets are cheap. They're going to be a fraction of the cost compared to one that is 50% CDR. They do the same thing. Saves you a bunch of chaos. It only saves you chaos though. Like there's no exalts involved in any of the stuff we're doing. Anyway, Herald of Thunder damage. We take 250 lightning damage from each of these Storm Secret rings, which gets us to 500 damage per tick, per cycle of the Storm Secret. So every 132 ticks, we take 500 damage. We have resists of 75%. We have a flask of 20% less damage taken. We have Beast Fur Shawl, which is 10% more damage taken. And Hiron's Fury, I believe, gives us 7% more damage taken. All in all, what that means is that the actual life points we lose every time Herald of Thunder triggers is 170 and 118 damage. And that means that if you look back at the damage threshold, it takes us 5 triggers of Herald of Thunder to trigger our 258 damage threshold. Funny enough, also takes us 5 to trigger the 583 damage threshold. Right, so right off the bat, there's like, oh, that seems like we should have level 2 cast on damage taken. That's probably true. We can then combine both the number of triggers we need for Herald of Thunder, multiplied by the duration of these triggers, plus the cooldown of cast on damage taken, and we know that our total cycle time of cast, cooldown, getting hit by Herald of Thunder, and the next cast is 924 milliseconds. Right, so we reset like once a second. Okay. Now let's talk about the spells we trigger. What we're doing is we are using Spellblade. That's the way that this build is set up right now. We have a pretty much perfectly rolled Hiron's Fury because they're cheap. If they're less well rolled, then this is going to be slightly lower, but they're really cheap. And you don't care about most of the stats. Like the only thing you care about is lightning damage, per frenzy charge, and what's that other thing you need? Oh yeah, the base damage roll. Anyway, so we roughly hit for 415 damage. If you look at the low and the highs of both the physical and the lightning damage combined, Spellblade multiplies that by 135, and then we can then compare a Frostbolt, which is what I'm just using as my go-to spell for this one, to figure out, okay, well, our Frostbolt has a base damage, it has a damage effectiveness, and then we can figure out what's the damage that we get from Spellblade compared to the base damage. Right? We can see that we get almost 10 times as much damage from Spellblade support as the base damage in this particular case, at the expense of a gem socket, at the expense of our main hand weapon. Right? There's a lot of at the expense clauses on this. And then when we apply the less modifier from cast on damage taken, we can see that we do about 855 damage a second before any resist from the monster whatsoever, or any increased damage, more damage multiplier, any of that stuff, with our Frostbolt. The vast majority coming from the Spellblade. Alright. And then we can also do that for all the other numbers. And first thing that you'll see is that, hey, we can actually level our cast on damage taken setups to level 2, and that's a really big improvement, right? It's 10% more damage. Thereabouts. 855, well, I can actually do the math, right? No? Just divide by that. 9% more damage. So that's some easy wins right there. We can also start playing with some of the numbers. Now the reason that that's so big is that we go from dealing 35% of the damage to 37% of the damage. Right? That is a big driver in why that's going on. Anyway, so we're gonna scoot around some, just make sure everything fits, make things a little bit smaller, and we're gonna start playing with some of the numbers. First of all, we don't take 500 damage because a Herald of Thunder ignites. So because we ignite, we take another few points of damage. So that means that we could take 600 damage. Now that's interesting. Our level 2 cast on damage taken setup didn't change, but our level 1 cast on damage taken setup actually is pretty good. 997. It could be slightly more optimal if we had the level, probably like 8, 7. Looks like we could get to 999. Right, so if we take into account our Eye of Innocence, it actually has some good synergy on this cast on damage taken setup. It's 20% more damage. If we quality up our jewelry, which we can, to make them even more painful, we can go to 720 damage taken. Right, both of them can have 20% quality. 600 times 1.2 is 720. So one thing to note, that upgrading the quality of these jewelry, our level 1 cast on damage taken setup almost didn't change. Right, it's actually 997, and if we put it at 600 damage, it's 997. There's literally no change for qualitying it up. But if we do so, we find that there are other equilibria positions that appear to us, and it looks like we could have like a 15% more damage multiplier by doing that. Which 15% more damage for quality up your jewelry is pretty amazing. And we would be running a level 10 version to get there. Right, so this is one of those interesting things you start seeing when you're mucking around. So right now we're also using a flask. We are using I don't know what the name is. Vinctar's vessel. Vessel of Vinctar. And it does 120, or it does 20% less lightning damage taken because it's like a topaz flask. If we get rid of this flask, we see that we can get about a 13% damage boost, right? We can go to higher cast on damage taken numbers again. Right, and the math is a little funky because, well, the math has some rounding errors because the Vinctar would only reduce the lightning damage, not the lightning and the fire damage. Either way, getting rid of the vessel of Vinctar actually is a pretty substantial boost, right? Our highest number we see here is 1350 thereabouts, whereas if we had the vessel, we see 1150 is the best that we really see on the chart. Right, so again, it's almost a 15% more damage multiplier. Is that worth it? You get a lot of survivability out of that vessel, Vinctar, because 20% leech with instant leech is ridiculous. Actually, 20% leech is just really a weirdly high number. Anyway, Beast Fur Shawl. We use it for a recoup, but funny enough, it actually has some impact on our damage too. Like that more damage taken actually increases our DPS. Our higher point that we see right now with Beast Fur Shawls, more damage taking and zeroed out, 1083. And if we put it back in, 1158. Not as big a deal, right? It's like 6%-ish more damage. But 6% more damage is not bad from a mod which looked like it's negative, like a penalty. So yeah, this debugging has led me to the realization that first of all, qualifying up my jewelry, 600, has some pretty big payoffs. Because when I quality up my jewelry, I can run a few higher level cast when damage taken setups. And the reason I'm probably going to run a mixture of level 1 cast when damage taken setups and these higher level cast when damage taken setups is because when a spell uses a does lightning damage, then my increased lightning damage will have a very large impact on the cast when damage taken of the damage per second. Whereas if a spell, I'm just really using it to just take more damage, like or ignite things more. Those spells don't really have the same payoff for me in that sense, right? So if I make my main link in my chest a bunch of lightning spells, and I focus around a level 10 cast and damage taken, then we would get, 15% more damage, primarily from a single target perspective. And some of the lightning spells scale up drastically with levels, right? Arc gets more chains and has a really nice single target. Spark has more balls, also helps a bit with single target. So I think that that's gonna be the next stop, is quality up our jewelry, and then we're going to put in some different levels cast on damage taken and focus on having a main chest link of level 10 cast on damage taken, which will then power a bunch of different lightning spells. Now, we did the math with Frostbolt, and chances are that for some of these other spells, we'll have a harder time to quite replicate these same numbers. Right? There's a lot of manual data entry going on here. But the range is relatively flat. Like, there's definitely worse numbers at the top end. Although there's like a 1040 here, right next to the 1156. It's maybe I have to run all the numbers, which would be a nightmare. But yeah, there's a lot of finicking in getting your numbers to line up just right in these cast and damage taken builds, and Excel or Google Sheets is gonna be your friend in trying to check how things behave and run experiments, right? Like if you say, you know what, I'm going to ride the lightning, my resist is gonna be 65. I mean, there's some numbers that definitely went up, right? Yeah, you take more damage, but you deal more damage. Are you willing to take more damage to deal more damage? I don't know, but you have a very dynamic ability to create a sliding scale on how much damage you're taking, how much damage you're dealing, and you can tweak it and, compared to where we started, with just the 600. So this is 1500 is about the max that we see right now. That's 50% more damage by qualitying up and dropping our resist. Should you do that? Probably not. Probably not. But I think that there's definitely more opportunity to get more damage out of the build. And even like this example that we're looking at, right? Like 600 damage, 75 resist, running the flasks and the more multipliers of damage taken due to Hiron's Fury and Beast Fur Shawl, which both actually impact our DPS, right? These are not necessarily just negative modifiers. We are seeing that there's definitely some opportunity to run different level setups. And some of the benefits with like running different level cast on damage taken setups is that you also break the cycle. And what I say with break the cycle is that right now I'm running level 1 cast on damage taken in my hat, gloves, boots, and chest. Which means that I have to pay the mana for all my spells at exactly the same time. Now, do I have the mana coming in? Yeah. But I need to have enough unreserved mana to pay for all that. Whereas if I can spread it out more, then I can pay for the mana over a longer period of time. It might be a little bit easier. I may not need as much unreserved mana. On occasion, they'll step on each other, but you know, in the long run, it might be a benefit as well. So yeah, this is the stage we're in right now. This is probably, given how god-awful cast on damage taken does with video cards, the best frame rate video that I'm gonna have for this build. I'd like to get a video out of where the build is gonna end up for the season, and I'm going to go back to it next season. I'm definitely going to take a different approach, I think, but I still see opportunities there, and I think for next season I'm eyeing going what's that stupid ability? Blood Magic. Right now, the way the build is set up, I have to invest a fair amount in getting my mana to work out. And if I can get rid of that and I can go Blood Magic instead, then I can use Life Recoup to solve my mana issues. Getting Life Recoup is so much easier than getting Mana Recoup. Right? Yeah, you can get 20% Mana Recoup from a Mastery and an Anoint, but that's it. Right? So on the flip side, if we are going with Blood Magic, then what we can do instead is to say like, hey, I'm going to be running Life Recoup, and you can spend 3 points on a cluster and get 36% of damage taken recouped as life. That's not bad. So yeah, I'm looking at ways to tweak the build further in next season. And I'm going to have one more build review for where we're at this season coming out later this week.